Good evening. So it's my pleasure to welcome everybody to NYU Washington, D.C. tonight. My name is Steve Hoyer. I do government affairs for NYU based here in D.C. We host a lot of great public policy events here in this building. I know a lot of you have been to a few, but I'm really looking forward to this one as this involves three of my favorite people from their different respective fields. Tonight's event, it's going to feature NYU President Emeritus John Sexton and a discussion about his recent book, Standing for Reason, the University in a Dogmatic Age. John, of course, was president from NYU from 2001 to 2016, and before that, he was president of the NYU Law School for 14 years. Joining John tonight is Representative Diana DeGette, Colorado's senior member of Congress. Congresswoman DeGette has used her seat on the powerful House Energy and Commerce Committee to become a leading congressional voice on issues ranging from advancing healthcare, protecting the environment, supporting research at the National Institutes of Health. Most importantly, she's a graduate of the NYU School of Law. In addition, we're joined by Terry Hartle, who's the Senior Vice President of the American Council on Education, or ACE. ACE is the major coordinating body for the nation's colleges and universities, representing over 1,700 college and university presidents around the country. An expert voice on higher ed, Terry is ACE's senior government and public affairs official representing the community before Congress and all federal agencies and the federal courts. So thanks again, everyone, for coming, and I think I'll send our group in, and I'll let Terry Hartle kick it off. So thank you, everyone. We're ready for you guys.
Talk about John Sexton's new book, Standing for Reason, the University in a Dogmatic Age. Let me get this out of the way at the start. 50 years ago, it was by no means certain that NYU would survive. It was a deeply troubled institution. It has not only survived, it has become one of the greatest universities in the world. Indeed, if we had a list of success stories in higher education the last 50 years, John, you and Boston College would be at the top of it. And I think the secret in NYU's not only survival but flourishing was the great leadership that it received from a small number of individuals who were fortunate enough to serve as president. Obviously, John Sexton was the most recent, but his predecessors, Jay Oliva, John Brademas, John Sawhill, all individuals of vision and purpose and commitment that really produced a world-class university. So when John Sexton offers observations about where American universities are today and their role in the world, they are worth paying very careful attention to. But before we talk about your view about universities, John, there's a story I hope you'll share with the crowd. And it's a story about how you happened to go and get a PhD in religion. It seems that you were walking across the Fordham campus.
You going to tell a story? Or?
I'll let you go ahead. I just simply, it involved you and another great educator, Tim Healy.
So, first of all, there's no one that's been a better advisor to the higher education community over decades than Terry. And on behalf of all of higher education, I want to thank you for your decades of service. There's no student I've ever had of whom I'm more proud than this woman. And I should say, her husband, who was also part of the very first class that I taught at NYU Law School in the fall of 1981. It was my course on religion and government. It was not my civil procedure class, so I can't count them as one of my couples.
I've heard you do it, though.
No, I do. I frequently expand the penumbral effect of my civil procedure class to include you and Lino, the judge, who has somehow landed and will be here sometime this evening because she's here. But in any case, thank you to the two of you. Now, back to the story. I almost interrupted you when you refer to Boston College as one of the great success stories of the last 50 years and omitted Georgetown. And of course, Georgetown was, the modern Georgetown, was created by this extraordinary Jesuit, Father Timothy Healy. Now, my apologia pro vita sua, my explanation for my sins, of which there are many, Father Joe McShane of Fordham, when he introduces me, says that he is one of my two confessors, because I have so many sins, I require two confessors. And, the only explanation or mitigating factor I can give is that I was very young as I went through high school and college. I arrived at college at the age of 16. And, but Tim Healy had a purpose for me. He wanted me to be Fordham's first Rhodes Scholar. And those of us that were in what we called the heliocentric universe really took him seriously. For reasons I can't quite explain, in my freshman year, right after my father died, I got on a subway and went out to my sister's high school, and somebody allowed me to teach, and I stopped going to class. So the moment that you describe is in spring of my senior year, and my grade point average was hovering at the minimum level that was required for graduation, which was a C, 2.0. So I couldn't afford not to go to class anymore and get another D that would bring it below. So ironically, in April of my senior year, I was walking across campus on the way to class, and the Tim Healy stopped me. Now, he had long since given up hope of my becoming a Rhodes Scholar, but he said to me, his first sentence I still remember was, "You've been a big disappointment." And then he said, "But..."
That got your attention, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. But the Vatican Councils happened, and it's going to be important for Catholics to understand other religions, and we're starting a PhD program in religion, and we'll give you a fellowship and pay you to go to graduate school for your PhD. Now, at the time, at least for a few moments, I felt very honored. I later, of course, as a university administrator, came to realize he had funding for a program but no students, and he looked out at the quadrangle and said, "Who probably hasn't signed up yet for law school or graduate school or anything else?" And he was completely right. So I was an unusual PhD student in two respects. First of all, I finished it, including my dissertation, in 3 years, maybe 4, because I wasn't interested in depth. I was just interested in moving through, and yeah, I had the fellowship for 4 years. But the second was, most PhD students are really, their life is going to be about their discipline. And for me, this was just a device to provide me income so I could continue working with my high school kids, for which I was not being paid. And because it was religion, it could keep my mother, who was a very pious Catholic, at bay, because she couldn't complain about so I got my PhD in religion as a result. But it actually, I think this is why you asked the question, the Vatican Council and studying religion in the moment of the papacy of John the 23rd and the apex of the influence of people like Teilhard de Chardin, who was living on the Fordham campus at the time, kind of gave me, without my really realizing it, it framed for me a view of the world, which is the essence of what has caused me to be a good noticer of certain things.
Well, the religious background really leads you to point out quite correctly something that most folks won't have thought of, which is that in the last 2 generations, most of the world's great religions have moved in the direction of open-mindedness, tolerance, acceptance, ecumenical behavior. But our civil society has gone in the direction of closed-mindedness, intolerance, rejection, fear, anger, hostility, you name it. We seem to be moving in 2 very different directions. But your core point of your book is that in this age, when we're moving in the direction where facts are relative, anger and hostility rule, that the university has to be a sacred space that provides a neutral playing field for the competition of ideas, where the good, the bad, and the ugly come together. They're openly debated, assessed, examined, and people can feel that they're going to be heard. What sort of things, if you were advising a new university president, what sort of things would you advise them to do to move their university in that direction? Because obviously there are countervailing pressures to make universities a safe space where people are not threatened, that they feel completely confident and comfortable in their environment, even though the world is not at all like that outside the campus gates.
Well, it's interesting that you surprised me there when you made the notion of genuine dialogic space in the tradition of competitive debate. You made that and ecumenism on the one hand contrast with what you called safe space, because in a way, for me, the idea is to make the university a safe space for genuine dialogic conversation and ecumenism, because the heart, I mean, if you think about this, the conversations that most of us would see as seminal conversations in our lives, and many of them occur inside of universities, are the conversations not in class but outside of class, over coffee, frequently in the library late at night. They seem to be a distraction from the work you're doing, but you're feeling extremely safe in a conversation and able to make yourself vulnerable. The same thing's true, of course, of love. Vulnerability is key to love. And I think the ecumenical movement, using this metaphor that unites the book, as you say, I mean, the good news is that over 60 years, we've seen in theological dialogue this wonderful movement. The bad news is that over the same 60 years, as you say, our politics have gone in the opposite direction. A startling data point that I include in the book is that in 1956, 4% of Americans told pollsters they'd be upset if somebody in their family married somebody from the other political party. Today, that number is 40%. More than race, more than ethnicity, you know. I mean, it's mind-boggling when the John of 1956, when I was in high school, thinks of that in 2016. But a key is a willingness to be vulnerable. And I think if I were advising a president, I would say that his or her primary responsibility is to foster that kind of dialogue, to insist upon it, and to create the incidents of it. And that means setting up rules of engagement and insisting that they be observed in a content-neutral way and that can be explained. And this is a highly eccentric position, as you know, among university presidents. For the 28 years that I was dean and president, I felt that I gave up my rights of political expression, because I felt if I was identified with a position, except on things like financial aid for students, funding for higher education, research, and things of that sort, which are part of the portfolio, and there I was a militant advocate, as you know, but as Diana knows too, but when it came to the death penalty or the war in Iraq or whatever, I forswore so that I could be credible if I said the viewpoint has to broaden, the viewpoint horizon has to broaden at our university. My advice to presidents, even though that is counterintuitive, and it's not done out of cowardice, it's not because you don't want to speak or you don't want to offend somebody, it's done because you're the guardian of that space, and it's your job to make sure it's genuinely dialogic and that people who are willing to make themselves vulnerable aren't hurt thereby.
It's interesting because one of the criticisms that we hear of university presidents today is that they're not genuine public intellectuals, that they have a very important forum that could tee up issues, if you will, for the public to discuss and debate and say that these are important. But your point is that's for the people who work at the university outside the president to do. It is not for me to do it as a university president, to decide what issues are going to be talked about. It's just to make a campus safe for that level of discussion.
I did my doctoral dissertation on Charles Eliot, who was for 40 years the president of Harvard and who invented the bully pulpit, who thought, and it was called the first citizen of the United States because he would opine on all issues from the great pulpit that he had, both of his stature and the institution. So I understand what the bully pulpit is. One of my favorite students of all time, I won't use her name, but she was the head of the young socialists at NYU as I became president. And the Iraq War was dawning as a possibility, and my daughter had above her bed a picture from the student newspaper that had this young woman coming through the arch with 6 of her socialist minions behind her, and she had a sign with my picture on it, and a circle and a strike through my picture, and it said regime change at NYU, not in Iraq. And I gave her the right. I would have monthly open fora with the students, and they would come, and I always gave her the right of first question, because she always asked the same question. Why don't you go to the bully pulpit and condemn this incipient war? And then finally, about the third or fourth time, I looked at her and I said, now look at me. What am I? I am a straight, white, 50s Catholic male. From where you sit, it doesn't get any worse than me. Are you sure you want to send me to the bully pulpit to speak on your behalf? And her lip quivered, and she said, maybe not. And that was the last time. But that's the point, is if the president is engaged on one side or the other of the conversation, it's hard to view the president as being the guardian of the space.
But I think, just to add, I think that now people not only expect university presidents to do this, but they expect politicians to do this too, to be reflective of whatever their personal ideology is. And I of course, I always agree with everything that my former law professor and dean
That's
taught
not in the
me.
spirit of the book.
But I do.
A healthy disrespect for authority is.
I know, but for just even to the point of our shared belief that collegiate debate is the foundation of all that is good in the world. John knows this. I was a high school and college debater. But what debate teaches you is to think critically and to be able to make your argument passionately while at the same time understanding the other person's point of view. And I think that that's what we've lost in a lot of the academic discourse and a lot of the political discourse in this country, is that young woman, she can't see that it's your job as the university president to give the openness to every idea, including her ideas on socialism, and to let those ideas flourish and the debate continue. And I think this is true in our political institutions too, where for a variety of societal reasons, politicians just aren't allowed to do that. But I think it's changing in politics.
An interesting thing about the world from which we come, the world of competitive debate, is that, you had to go deeply into the topic because it was the same topic for the year.
Right.
So you might be the champion in the first tournament in October, but if you didn't keep deepening your argument, by the time you got to December, you were in the rearview mirror. And even in the debate, you had to go through 4 iterations of the argument, and if you didn't, our word was extended, right?
Right.
And then the coolest 2 things, I didn't really notice.
Watch out. Here we go.
No. I know you don't think of me as cool, but I can say.
You're the coolest.
Yeah, but
just look at the title of his book.
Yeah, I didn't really realize this until I set up the world from which we come as the kind of paradigmatic university and what a university should be. You didn't know which side of the argument you were on
Right.
until the coin was flipped.
Right.
So you had to prepare for both. You had to know the arguments of both sides. And then the final thing is, what really separated a champion debater from a very good debater is a champion debater was a great listener. Because if you didn't listen carefully to your opponent's argument, you couldn't answer it in the nuance that the judge was sitting in the back of the room hearing. So it really was a good preparation for, in a way, the ideal of a university.
That's right.
Congresswoman, you represent Denver. You have a number of colleges and universities in your district, a wide array of institutions, University of Denver, Regis University, a Catholic school, Community College of Denver. Do these issues come up when you talk with university leaders in your district? Do they talk to you about the challenge of balancing the demands for a free and open debate with a place that is safe and comfortable?
So in talking to my university presidents, they are constantly trying to make a safe place where people can have the debate. And the question right now in higher education is, what does that mean? Does that mean that you can have any debate that happens if it's done in a respectful way, or does it mean that you have to have certain areas that can't be explored? I guess I can say this here, cone of silence, but my favorite university president, won't surprise you, is the president of, in my district is Father Fitzgibbons, the president of Regis University, because it's a Jesuit university, and the Jesuits are continually spending all of their time trying to figure out how to have this discourse that John is talking about in his book.
Mm-hmm. Yes. How does this issue come up when you talk to other members of Congress? Universities are squelching speech, or they're not protecting students. Is this something that you hear about? We've actually had the President of the United States issue an executive order dealing with this particular topic. And it's one of those issues that it's very easy to establish a position on without having to worry about listening to the other side.
Well, I think that there are a lot of perceived grievances among people who don't really understand what our view is of what higher education should be. And so there's a lot of perception that, for example, higher education has a liberal bent. But when you look at, I'd like to know John's view, because I think if you look at the statistics, that's just not correct. And most universities, most professors are really trying to encourage the type of intellectual exploration and discourse that he writes about in the book.
You're right about the data. There's extensive social science data that goes back decades that traces the self-identity and the political viewpoints of professors. And if you go back, the most recent big survey comparison is a 20-year comparison that's now about 10 years old, but the data hasn't changed much.
Right.
And about 40% of the faculty at universities identified as liberal in the first part of the survey, and then 20 years later, it was still 40%. What had happened was fewer identified as conservative, and there was the development of a near majority of the faculty that identifies as moderate. And then the same thing happens when you do, test questions about political party and issues and things of that sort. So the stereotype of the now you can get into, in the interest of full disclosure here, no lies of omission, if you bore down into particular schools and departments,
Right.
because I've described a university that includes the doctors, it includes the business school professors, and so forth and so on. But I'll tell you something, I've returned to the law school after a 15-year absence, and I really knew nothing. I wouldn't let anybody talk to me about the law school because I had appointed my successor, and I thought that he was entitled to his run. I had had my run, so I wasn't going to interfere. I even stopped teaching at the law school until last academic year. But now I'm back on the law school faculty. I go to every faculty meeting. I never speak, and I vote for what the dean is advocating every time. So I don't get lobbied because people know I'm the ultimate
You're a
dean's
party guy. You're a party
voice.
guy.
And I'm there. I'm
Yeah.
a blue dog Democrat. You know, would they were more. But in any case, what strikes me, and this may surprise you, but I will tell you it is the case, is that, first of all, the depth of conversation in NYU law school faculty meetings, let's assume it's not as sublime in other parts of the university, but I'm telling you, and the ideological spread, the philosophical spread, well thought out and well defended of the NYU law school faculty is broader than the ideological spread on the current Supreme Court of the United States. So you know, we go from Richard Epstein to Brian Stevenson.
Right. Right.
You know, and they're all at the meetings and they all talk and it's all, you know.
But the public perception of
Is
the
not
law
that at
school
all, yeah.
is that it's a leftist
Especially NYU Law School,
organization.
right?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. And we have a very honorable public service, and you know, we still have a strong ACLU presence, which sometimes cuts left and sometimes cuts right in terms of particular
Right.
political issues.
John, a huge part of your legacy as president of NYU is NYU Global, and in particular the establishment of a very successful campus in Abu Dhabi. But some people have pointed out that Abu Dhabi is not necessarily friendly to free, open, unfettered speech, and that it's not necessarily terribly good on human rights issues. Of all the places in the world that you could have begun to really build NYU Global, what led you to start there? And what sort of conversations did you have to have with them about what's obviously a fundamental core belief of yours about the role that a university has to serve?
Well, first of all, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds or too contentious, because it's certainly the case that what you describe is the conventional wisdom. But I'm forced to say that we evolved into Abu Dhabi after a 1.0 that realized what New York City was, which was the first city in the world to have a neighborhood for every country in the world inhabited by people who were born in that neighborhood. You know, 40% of the citizens of New York City were born outside the United States. And so you can literally visit every country in the world by getting on the subway. And that was 1.0. And then 2.0 was sending our students out to Chinatown or Little Italy. Why don't we encounter these others on their own turf? And that was the study away sites. And it was at that point, which was around 2004 or 5, that we looked at our portfolio. And you know, we knew enough early on not to be Eurocentric. So we were in Accra and Buenos Aires and Sydney and Tel Aviv. And you know, so we're not just in Europe with our campuses. These are campuses, but they're only campuses for a semester. They're not full campuses. But we weren't in the Arab and Muslim world. Now, you could say what you just said and be well within the conventional wisdom channel about the Arab and Muslim world. So some people said, you can't be in the Arab and Muslim world. And my first instinct was to say, well, if we never do it, it'll never get done. And let's look. And we looked at 6 places. And everybody I spoke to said, do not put the Emirates, and particularly the leadership in Abu Dhabi, in the same. This is an oasis that shares much more than your initial statement would have thought of our core values. So I finally got to meet the leader there in 2006, early 2006, and it was an extraordinary conversation in which he said, I believe in the world I've seen you write about. I had done some writing about an interconnected, cosmopolitan, ecumenical world, which knitted together a set of premier idea capitals. And he said, I want Abu Dhabi not only to be, this is him now, this is not me preaching to him, not only to be the idea capital of this region, connected to New York and Shanghai and London and so on, but we've been blessed, and we're a small country, but I want to train the leadership for that world. So I don't want to create a study away site, he said. I want to create a university as good as any in the world. I want to authorize you to go out and find students everywhere in the world, in tribal villages and so forth, every sector of every society, and bring them here and have them live the ecumenical life that you. So this was his goal, and he said to me, "Could it be done?" And I said, "I don't know. No one's done it, but if you give us the opportunity to do it, we'll sure as heck try." And he said, "Well, what do you worry about?" And I said, "What I worry about is that either we or you will compromise excellence. That we'll compromise excellence by giving up some of our core values, that will compromise excellence by sending A- faculty or A- students you'll never notice, or that you'll compromise excellence by saying, cut back on this, cut back on that." And he said, "I promise you, I won't if you don't." And it started. And we're 12 years in, and there are students here, and people have taught in Abu Dhabi, and I would not make a claim that Abu Dhabi is perfect, but I certainly wouldn't make a claim that the United States is perfect. And if you asked me which ruler I'd rather have, I could answer that question in a way that probably wouldn't broadcast well, because he is a king, but he's very close to Plato's philosopher king, and this is a country that has free medical care for all, free education for all through the most advanced degree, housing for everyone, so let's not be too quick. One of the things you learn if you have a degree in comparative religion is not to come in as a missionary and a triumphalist and start talking about how we're better than other people. That's kind of the core of the otherness that I'm trying to fight in arguing for ecumenism. So, we took a year in a quiet phase, so to speak, where we engaged faculty. The faculty senate had a committee. This was all confidential because the one thing that they asked was, because there had just been the Dubai ports deal, they said, "Don't make a deal with us and then break it. So let's see if we're really going to do this. And then if we're going to do it, let's do it." And we took a year, and in the early stages, they said, we want the NYU that's in New York. And I would say, no, you don't want the NYU that's in New York. You want the core values of the NYU that's in New York. But why would we go around the world to do the same thing we have in New York? And you should want something that is more aspirational than a university that's in an American city with 75%, 80% of its students being American. You're really the crossroads of the world. And the result is a student body that has 1,500 or so students from 140 different countries, and they're legitimately and they're from every sector of society, including people who have never been on a plane before they come in for their interviews, because no one's admitted without 2 days of interviews. So it's you look now back, because the early arguments were the quality is going to be lowered and so forth. We've now had 12 Rhodes Scholars out of NYU Abu Dhabi.
Let me just say, I meet with the Abu Dhabi students when they come to DC, and these students are as inquisitive, intellectual, and challenging as any students. I haven't been to the Abu Dhabi campus, but I think that the goal of a high quality ecumenical education is really being pursued at that campus.
Let me just add something
based on the students I'm meeting.
To Diana's point, because I'm sure you've met some students from NYU Abu Dhabi, this ecumenical group, but I know the students you meet with most often are not NYU Abu Dhabi students, but are students in the colleges there who are part of a program NYU Abu Dhabi runs. So they're all Emirati and largely women. 85% of the Sheikh Mohammed scholars are women.
Exactly.
So you talk about the synergistic effect. I mean, these are students who are chosen by NYU faculty as the top 20 students in the Emirates, and they come to the United States, and I know you meet with them each year. So you're not even seeing the NYU Abu Dhabi students. You're meeting students who are all Emirati, all Muslim, right. And if they were at home, they'd be covered, in traditional garb and so forth. But you see them in their Prada.
Yeah. Well, they could see me in their Prada anyway. They couldn't see you, but they could.
No, they could see me. They do, in fact.
Let's open it up to any questions or comments from folks in the audience. It's a rare opportunity to talk to someone who's been a distinguished university president who's unplugged.
Unplugged.
He was unplugged then.
Always unhinged, yeah.
John will be happy, I'm sure, to take questions or comments about anything. Baseball fans, Yankees are in first place. I know we'd be happy to.
My previous book was Baseball as a Road to God, so I can tell you whether there's a God or a justice. But also feel free to ask Diana and Terry questions.
Hi, Susan Thomas, former student of yours at the law school.
God bless you, Susan.
Yeah. I love the book. And when you were talking about both Abu Dhabi and Shanghai campuses, and you were talking about some of the challenges that you deal with in addressing certain issues that might not be discussed in the same way outside of school. Okay, here in the US, we have certain dates that are significant to us, including D-Day, 9/11. In China, there's the anniversary of Tiananmen Square and all that surrounded that. And Chinese students are not being taught about that at all. How do you deal with that in the university, especially given that you mentioned that the Chinese Minister for Education had sat in on your class while you were teaching about religion there?
So first of all, I'm going to start with the last point you made because I don't want it to be misunderstood. I told that story because he had heard of my effectiveness as a teacher from some of my students, and he wanted to see what goes on here. And so he came from Beijing, not to inspect or anything like that, but to sit in on my class, and then we went to lunch, and he compared me to Confucius. So I guess I passed the test. Your question is very interesting, and let me just explain for those that haven't seen the book yet that so NYU Abu Dhabi and NYU Shanghai are both what I would describe as liberal arts tutorial, because the faculty-student ratio is 1:5. Research university, because there's a huge research apparatus. There are 300 postdocs on the Abu Dhabi campus, for example, and an equivalent number in China. And there's enormous amount of, and everybody has to be involved with the undergraduates. So the undergraduates are really involved in the research. Research university education. The student bodies are about the same size. So think Swarthmore, but with a much bigger research portfolio than Swarthmore has. One that's at the level of the best research universities in the United States, because the faculty are rotating through, in part because they get great equipment in these places. And NYU Abu Dhabi, the largest contingent is the American contingent, which is only 15% of the student body. So you have a student body of 1,500 from 144 different countries. The largest contingent is only 15%, and they're not in their own country. Now, to NYU Shanghai. The difference there is, and we were delighted with this difference, because we didn't want the same thing as NYU Abu Dhabi. The difference there is that half the student body is native Chinese. China graduates 12 million high school students a year. 9 million take the college entrance exam. It's called the Gaokao. You have to be in the top 60,000 on the Gaokao to apply to NYU Abu Dhabi. We are now the most selective college, more selective than the C9. So half of our student body is Chinese. The other half are like the Abu Dhabi student body, except there's a much larger American contingent, probably half of them, because of the magnetism of going to China and studying there. every Chinese student gets a non-Chinese roommate on day one. And there's where the ecumenism begins, in the food, the music, every element of the education. There are, believe me, because the 30th anniversary of Tiananmen Square is coming up. It's this week, I think, if not today. It's today, okay? And I was over there for the graduation, and all the students on campus they know the history, and I think it must be said that there's what I would describe. So when people ask me, do I teach my class, because I've taught both in Abu Dhabi and Shanghai. I teach in Abu Dhabi every year. I teach in Shanghai about every second year. And I actually go there to teach. And people say, well, do you teach differently? Do you have to, And my course is religion and government, the same one well, it's not the same syllabus, but and I use the same syllabus in all 3 campuses. But I teach differently. I don't teach differently because of where I am. I teach differently because of who the students are. So if I mention the Civil War in Abu Dhabi, I'm not being clear at all. The chances of, because I have 20 students from 18 different countries, the chances of them thinking of 1865 or 1861, they're probably thinking of something happened in their country in the last decade, right? Because we got kids that survived the Rwandan genocide, we got kids out of Ethiopian tribal. So you have to be extremely, it's like doing a Supreme Court oral argument. You really have to know your audience, and a good teacher does that. And I make arguments in the book about trigger warnings and things like that in that context, right? But we can discuss anything. And the first thing I say to my students, both in Abu Dhabi and in Shanghai, is that I want them to learn a healthy disrespect for authority. But healthy disrespect means that you have a reason for questioning what's been said. And they read unedited Supreme Court opinions, so they see dissents and concurrences, and they're encouraged to disagree with me. They probably can't tell my view on most of the cases, although in some I was the lawyer for one side or the other, particularly the moment of silent prayer and the creationism case. But we don't feel inhibition on campus. Now, could our students go out to Tiananmen Square as part of a demonstration here? They could. We warn them. For example, we're very strict with them about not using pot or prohibited substances, especially in China, because we're not going to be able to protect you. We'll do all we can to protect you, but it's not the same as Washington Square. Okay? And if you're found, we may not be able to protect you. And the same thing is true if you go out and you participate in a demonstration. Okay? Now, a lot of the stuff you've heard, especially about Abu Dhabi, is not true. The people wear bikinis on the beach. Now, is it tasteless to walk down the Corniche in a bikini? Yes. Will you be arrested? No, probably not. But you shouldn't do it. And we try to tell our students not to do it. That's part of being respectful. I'm trying to give some nuance to your question, and it gets to something that Terry and I were discussing in the green room. Why do you go to a country that, you go back to his first question, you take the conventional wisdom. Well, you go, first of all, because you're a little humble and you don't think you're perfect. And they look at you and can say a whole bunch of things. First time I ever visited Brazil was in 1987. USAID sent me down there as part of the constitution-making process to give a week of lectures to the Constitutional Convention on the religion clauses. And halfway through my first lecture, one of the delegates put up her hand and said, "Why are you Americans so obsessed with liberty? We want our Constitution to be about economic rights. You don't have any economic rights in your Constitution." Hello, I was a relatively junior professor at NYU. It really made sense to me. I remember when I was teaching the LLM students at NYU constitutional law, and I said, it's remarkable how few times we've amended our Constitution. And one of them, because these are all experienced lawyers, put up his hand and said, "You amend your Constitution all the time. You just call it a Supreme Court opinion." Who are you kidding? So you know, a little humility in this conversation it goes a long way. But I will tell you this: I have not, including when the Minister of Education came, I have not pulled any punches in my classes. And the first group of Sheikh Mohammed scholars, even before NYU Abu Dhabi opened, went out with me to the palace because His Highness was going to give them their degrees. And the first thing they said to him was, you know what he taught us? To have a healthy disrespect for authority. And without missing a beat, he said, if one of you learned that, I would give a day's production of oil. So, you know, let's not underestimate. You know, the first group of Sheikh Mohammed scholars had a woman named Salama in it. You want to come to my office, Susan, you can see the poem she wrote at the end. You know, it was each week we would play lawyers and judges, making arguments on both sides, drawing a crooked line in the sand between what was right and what was wrong, only to erase it and redraw it after argumentation and debate. This was a Muslim woman. So, you know.
That also answers the question, why have a campus in Abu Dhabi and Shanghai?
Yeah.
Let's go to the gentleman here in the second row.
I'll try to be more brief. I'm sorry.
That's okay. My name is Bruce McBarnett, NYU Law, class of '83. I was there when Congresswoman DeGette was there.
The ruler of the student body she was, right?
Yes, she was, and she did a good job. In fact, I was one of the representatives on her council, and she had a
She still got
tight
your
whip
vote.
that she would make sure that everybody towed the line. But and
I'm
she
still
was very.
that way.
But it definitely inured to the benefit of the student body for sure. A quick question that I have is, I wanted to ask what venues or places or opportunities do you see for an opportunity for the universities to have an impact on government in terms of moving them more in an ecumenical or open-minded manner, or in a direction that would be one which is more in line with the safe space that universities are trying to establish for the free debate and discussion of ideas and thoughts.
I think we should hear from Diana on this, but you want me to go first? Or okay, so Bruce, the opening of the book is a kind of diagnosis of what I call a development of secular dogmatism, a kind of virulent allergy to nuance and complexity where, and I recognize it, because back in 1956, and I'm going to invoke a great man's name because you're not going to believe what he said. In 1956 in Brooklyn, Father Daniel Berrigan, who was kind of the Martin Luther King of the peace movement, right? I mean, he was in the 60s, a leader of the peace movement, wrote on the blackboard the words, extra ecclesia nulla salus. Outside the church, there's no salvation. And I went up to him after class and said, Father Berrigan, does that mean my best friend Jerry Epstein can't go to heaven? And he said to me, John, if you don't baptize him, he won't go to heaven. And by the way, when I went to teach the Sheikh Mohammed scholars for the first time, I remember discussing with my NYU students that were in the same class, as also undergraduates here in New York, and I said, you know, I'm going to go teach students who may be the way I was in 1956, debate notwithstanding, because I didn't believe critical reasoning produced the most important truths. The most important truths came from Rome. They were revealed, okay? And the other stuff was, you know, this worldly. And I said, maybe the whole premise of my course is going to be something they don't comprehend, you know, and Salama proved me wrong, right? But what's happened is now, 60 years later, my diagnosis is our politics are revealed. They're not reasoned. So the data is overwhelming. More than 90% of Democrats are more liberal than the median Republican and vice versa. and 40% of the members of each party think that the other party is dangerous to democracy. So this huge chasm has developed. Now, I'm making an argument. I say in the end, in the conclusion, that I know my argument can appear Pollyannish, naive, quixotic, whatever you want to say. But if we don't fight the fight of trying to develop dialogic space, genuine ecumenical space, and I think the place to start is in our universities. Not that our universities are perfect. I talk about the dangers within as well as the dangers without. But we've got to get the universities can be the place where Archimedes can stand.
Well, I mean, of course, John's totally right about that, but taking it a step further towards how do we put that in practice right now with our political institutions. It's interesting. If I have a town, so over the last couple of years, I'm very proud of this. I'm a progressive Democrat, but I've won 2 national awards for bipartisanship by the Javits Foundation and by the former Members of Congress Foundation for some work I've done on healthcare legislation and other legislation. And what's interesting, when I go to town hall meetings in my congressional delegation with a whole bunch of progressives, remember, Denver is the city that just legalized psychotropic mushrooms. That's my congressional district, okay? So I go to a town hall meeting and I say to people, you know, I'm working on climate change. I'm working on healthcare policy. I'm working on all of these issues, and I'm doing it on a bipartisan basis. They cheer. So even though John's right that the data shows us that the Democrats are moving farther to the left and the Republicans farther to the right, there's still a real hunger, I think, among most Americans to have a political system that is less broken. And of course the university and the discourse is the fundamental to that. But the question is, how do we get that back into our political institutions at a time when it's all about the 30-second soundbite and about going on to cable TV and trashing the other side? And I think, frankly, this is kind of a radical notion, but I think that universities need to do a better job of engaging with elected officials. And by actually having roundtables or discussions or giving information in a way that can create that safe space for politicians to be able to have a bipartisan conversation. And I'll just finish by saying there are some nonprofits that are doing some of this work. Last week I was in Prague at a congressional roundtable, members of Congress and academics talking about Eurasian relations, Democrats, Republicans, House and Senate. And I frequently do these, and you would be surprised, maybe you wouldn't, but the members of Congress on a bipartisan basis are eager to develop joint solutions to some of these problems. And so I think though that academia can do a much better job of making a safe space for politicians so that they can have some of those conversations towards change.
If I just want to add, because we've left the invocation of the university as dialogic space at a very high level. I couldn't agree more with what Diana just said. Think of the characteristics of a university that could be brought into that conversation.
Right.
So a university is, in terms of its research and scholarship, which is what we're talking about here. We're not talking about the classroom space. We're talking about advancing ideas. Is fully transparent, right? It's books. It's articles. It's published to the world. It's published to an audience that consists of peer experts, who, by the way, view themselves as the negative. You know, they're going to try to disprove. They make their reputation. There is no orthodoxy, right? It's and it's built over time, and it's never settled. There's never the perfect statement. So it's a constant process that operates inside our universities. Baseball as a Road to God was a New York Times bestseller. It was done with Penguin Press. They wanted to do this book. But I said, no, I know it may mean less money for financial aid, because the proceeds go to financial aid, but I want to do this with a university press because it's juried, it's footnoted, there's a lot of stuff that's against the conventional wisdom, on everything from what we've been talking about here to student debt to, and I want to be in the public square with people, because that's what we do in universities. We're in the public square with people questioning, and because that's the way our thinking advances. Now, if we can take that model and really do it in universities, and not get distracted, by ideological capture even within universities, and begin to model it through what Diana's described, then we're going to begin to move.
I think I saw another hand up. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Eric Goldberg, NYU class of '08. I was in the first semester in Shanghai in '06, which was a lot of fun, and also a recipient, one of your many hugs. So it's great to be here.
Now, is that a criticism?
No, I loved it.
I want it to be known that 12 years ago, I realized that not everybody might want to hug for a whole host of good reasons, from religious to hygienic to just not liking me. So students had to request the hug or pull their right earlobe. So I just want to get that on the record right here. So.
So I do want to though ask your thoughts though about NYU today. Just over the past year, I've just been a little bit more concerned over the past year, or different articles that have come out, and just different stories I've heard from people that are still on campus with regard to Jewish students, with regard to some of the pro-Israel activities on campus, some of the hostility towards that, even most recently with the boycott for NYU Tel Aviv. And so I wanted to just get your thoughts, your assessment. I haven't read the book yet, so I don't know to what extent you address that in the book, but just want to get your thoughts in terms of what you feel like the university is doing today, should be doing, and how, really just your sober assessment about some of the activities that you're seeing, again, with regard to those issues.
So the first thing, and I'm not just saying this here, Dan Evans, who's been my main assistant for 30 years, will tell you this is absolutely a code by which I live. Since January 1st, 2016, when we were blessed by having a great man, Andy Hamilton, come from Oxford, he was the leader of Oxford, to succeed me, I've been aggressively uninformed about NYU. I really try to stay off the stage. I'm only doing this because I asked Andy if it was okay if I did this kind of thing, and he encouraged me to do it. I happen to know a little bit about the issues that you raise in particular because I made the mistake of about 3 weeks ago. I was coming out of my office, my university offices in Kimmel, and I was coming out of the student center, and I ran into Mark Wace, the senior vice president for student affairs, and I said to him, "How are you doing?" And he burst into tears, and I learned a little bit about some of the controversies that you've mentioned. I am very, very close because of their involvement in Abu Dhabi in particular. And I don't know if you saw the news, but there is now a vibrant Jewish community in the Emirates, which was not there before NYU Abu Dhabi. This is the year of tolerance in the Emirates. They have a minister of tolerance, and the first synagogue to be created in the Gulf in 700 years has been created, and Yehuda Sarna, who is the head of the Bronfman Center, has just been named the chief rabbi of the Emirates And none of this would have happened without NYU Abu Dhabi being there. And Yehuda and Khalid, the imam, because as you know, because I'm sure you were active in it if you care about these issues, there's a great, in New York, a great synergy, including the Shabbat for 2000, which is attended by the Muslim students, and Yehuda and Khalid both live in the same dormitory. We gave them housing in the dormitory. They share a child care person. They're raising their families together. So in a way, this is a model. And, when some in the press, I mean, I saw headlines, about NYU being anti-Semitic. I'll tell you, to some of us who've grown up in New York, that seemed like a very hard proposition. I wouldn't want to debate that side of the debate. On the other hand, there's absolutely no question that there has been anger in New York. I've also seen it, by the way, when I encountered a group of Palestinian students in tears on the campus in Abu Dhabi. Okay, because they felt in that context devalued by some of the stuff that was going on in New York. So it was a kind of ecumenical experience for me to see students in pain both in New York, Jewish students, and in Abu Dhabi, Palestinian students. And I think the task of those of us that care about this agenda is to try to bring them together. I wouldn't worry about the core of NYU, which is the heart of the question you're asking me. Andy Hamilton, I know because Mark told me, and then I looked it up, wrote an op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal condemning the BDS movement, the divestiture movement. I would not have done that, okay, according to the principles in his book, but most presidents would have. He did. That's a plus in the context that you raise this in. So I wouldn't worry about the core of the university on this. I think we're very much a model. After you left in 2008, we erected a building which now it connects to Kimmel, 5-story building, which is the Spiritual Life Ecumenical Center at NYU. I'm very proud of that. And the Jewish students and the Christian students and the Muslim students and students of non-Abrahamic faiths are constantly, I enter that door every day deliberately. I come in that door because it connects into Kimmel. My office is in Kimmel. Just to feel it, and the spirit is good. That's not to say there won't be notorious incidents as there are in every campus.
Let me just pick up on that. First, to thank you for your interest in NYU, despite the fact that you haven't been on campus for a number of years. One thing universities really seem to do is create a sense of community among people who spent time there, and your questions and your presence here is evidence that you're part of that broader community. Universities, Disraeli once said that universities are places of liberty, of learning, and light. They are also increasingly places of debate and disagreement and contentious discussion, because that's the world we live in. No university in the country is without these controversies, just simply because of the extraordinarily polarized time that we live in. I wouldn't want to be Andy Hamilton because I would not have wanted to follow as legendary a figure as John Sexton as a university president. But having said that, I think Andy is doing a terrific job picking up the baton from John and continuing to move NYU forward. So I will put that on the table. It's a gift for Andy that John stays aggressively uninformed, because too many university presidents have their predecessor looking over their shoulder, and that's a huge burden for them. So I think John is doing exactly what's the right thing for NYU and Andy, and I will do everything I can to convince you that I think Andy is doing the best possible job continuing to advance NYU. Somebody needs to tell me what our time situation
Just
is.
very quickly, I can't resist. There was another part of your question I can answer in a sentence. It was absolutely wonderful because there are ideologues among our faculty, and they will seize upon moments like this. And one of them was the vote of one of the departments to boycott NYU Tel Aviv. You referred to it. And John Beckman, the university spokesman, gave a wonderful answer to that I saw in this article that I read, which is, we're not quite sure what that vote means since no one was asking them to be involved in NYU Tel Aviv. So, you know, there's a sorting that goes on. And,
I'm told we have time for one more question, comment, observation.
yeah, Ellen has been waiting.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I didn't see right here in front of me.
She built the building, so we should really let her.
Well,
That's-
actually, I didn't. It was Jerry, but it's
Well,
been
the two of you are partners.
it's been a fascinating discussion. I want to go back to the dialogue of the role of the university in education and informing Congress. So I think it's incredibly important, but often they're reluctant. Just anecdotally, this last week there was an issue, a great issue on tobacco, that was misinformed by a member of Congress, and I had asked the university to intervene, and they did, in fact, intervene, and it was very helpful because they were able to give balance. But what I see from the universities, because I work in the healthcare area, are often they are not proactive about it. They allow a lot of, and perhaps you can comment on it, they allow a lot of discourse that is not informing the public or not informing or helping to allow to get out into the air or to the atmosphere that is really quite dangerous. And I don't know whether they're afraid of their own funding or they don't see it as their role. So perhaps maybe you can discuss that.
Well, yeah, Ellen, I think that universities really, for whatever reason, underestimate their power to influence public policy. And I frequently see this where, again, I don't know if it's that if I do sometimes see people who think, well, politics is dirty, and it's not the, it's not the sort of nonpartisan exchange or the academic exchange, but in fact, policymakers are really hungry to have the kind of information that academics can give them. It's this year I was, I'm a Democrat, as most of you know, and the Democrats took the majority. So I actually became chair of a very important subcommittee on the Energy and Commerce Committee, the Oversight Subcommittee, and I announced the theme of our committee this year is science, and everybody laughed. But it's kind of pathetic that you have to announce that the legislation you're going to consider and the hearings that you're going to conduct are going to be based on science. But I think this is where I meant it, and that's what I'm not having any testimony that's not based on science or fake science, I'm not doing that. And it sets kind of a different perspective. But that's where the university can be so impactful because they can give us the information that we need to pass legislation that is actually going to be cost effective and to work. I'll give you one example of an area that I work on, which is reproduction and family planning. I'm the co-chair of the pro-choice caucus in Congress, and we had a whole bunch of hearings in the last Congress on, and we also had legislation on abstinence-only sex education. Well, the data shows that not only does abstinence-only sex education not work, in some cases, the number of unwanted teen pregnancies increased after abstinence-only sex education. So it would seem to me that a place where Congress could actually pass evidence-based legislation would rely on data that our academic colleagues can give us. But yet, I think a lot of the researchers and academics are really afraid to come down and say to Congress, excuse me, men and women of Congress, but this policy doesn't work and it's actually counterproductive. And here's the science-based policy that can work.
If I could I just give, okay, then you wind it up. I just want to give an example that we didn't discuss tonight, but which is a good 20% of the book, and something that NYU's been a leader in since the early 1990s, which is the question of how do you finance higher education and what is good public policy around the financing of higher education. We invented in law schools the issue, what's called income contingent repayment of loans. And in the law school, we had the benefit that all of our students could go out into high-paying jobs. But so if they chose to do something which was public service, by their definition, not ours, obviously they were foregoing income for a good, and we should support them with financial aid. And that it was this very simple concept. And it took me a long time to work through how you would do that for outside of the professional school context. But in the book, I spell it out, but I'm running against tremendous headwinds because of a conventional wisdom that is deeply misinformed, that confuses, that treats higher education as if it were credit card debt. In fact, the illusion is there's more. You would never say that about the housing market, but buying a college education is much more like buying a house. In fact, it's a better investment than buying a house than it is credit card consumer spending. And that gets you off on a whole wrong analysis of it. And just to show that this is bipartisan here, you end up with intelligent people like Elizabeth Warren coming out with a proposal on higher education and, quote, student debt, close quote, instead of calling it student investment, student debt, once you name it, the death tax, which is horrible policy and is highly regressive. Under her plan,
and wildly expensive.
Oh, put that, and 66% of the benefit goes to the top 40% of family incomes, and only 4% of the benefit goes to the bottom 20%. So, I mean, you get these preposterous policy outcomes because of a lack of scientific, and this is, and it's out there. Brookings has done studies on this, and so forth and so on. So, coming back to the notion of getting deep in thought is going to lead to good policy, and that, of course, is the connection. If the universities can model genuine dialogic thought and bring it, as Diana has said, into the political realm.
I just want to finish and say, it all comes back to debate. Because if we hadn't learned how to do that research, we wouldn't be able to do that analysis.
I think that the challenge for any university president is to decide how to balance the public interest versus the interest of their institution. How and when to speak out about public policy issues that they might feel very strongly about, when doing so might undermine or might compromise their position to mediate these issues on campus. I think what Andy Hamilton did in writing that op-ed piece on BDS was incredibly courageous. I completely agree with him. He also made his life harder. That's just the way it is, and every university president is always calibrating those decisions, unless, like John, they start with an absolute rule. I will not do it because. Just this week, the Congresswoman and I were talking earlier about the legislation they passed to protect the dreamers. This is long overdue. Very important legislation, so of course the Senate will not take it up. But I can't tell you how many public university presidents in deeply red states said to me, I am so glad you're leading the charge on this. Keep doing it, but for political reasons, I can't say anything about it in my state. And that's the challenge that every...
And so how does that help? How does that help? It doesn't help.
It certainly doesn't help in the public arena, absolutely not. But
Well, it doesn't help them advocate for their students who might be dreamers.
it could complicate their efforts, particularly if, seriously, it could complicate their efforts, particularly if they're in a state where dreamers get in-state tuition. The state legislature doesn't realize that dreamers are getting in-state tuition at a public university. It puts a spotlight on an issue that may come back and bite the campus. These are very smart, thoughtful, careful people. They don't take these decisions.
Well, we'll have to debate this later, because I know we've run out of time.
The book is called Standing for Reason, the University in the Dogmatic Age. It is thoughtful, it is compelling, it's a bargain at twice the price. The first chapter alone is worth the price of the book. Is this what you want me to say?
It's what I wrote for him. Thank you all for coming and staying and being so patient and thoughtful. I appreciate it.